I'm Neetha Bidway, and this is Good Revenue. Today, we're going to talk about AI coming for big business and PE coming for everyone. We'll also get into a number of geopolitical updates, and we'll end with some good news on the healthcare front. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. You can always find links and resources to everything that we talk about in our show notes. Thanks so much for joining us. Too big to fail AI is turning on big tech and big banks as OpenAI seems to be coming for some really big competition. On October 21st, OpenAI announced the launch of a new browser. It's called Atlas, and it is very clearly and openly intended to be a competitor to Google. Google is obviously the behemoth in this space, and they've just come off of a huge antitrust trial in which the federal government tried to get them to sell Google Chrome. So this is no doubt something on their radar. In addition to OpenAI, Perplexity has recently also released a browser. Theirs is called Comet. But OpenAI's, I think, is more interesting because of a couple of these other updates in the last few weeks. So the next story is something called Project Mercury, and this is reporting from Bloomberg. But it looks like OpenAI has hired about 100 ex-investment bankers, and they're basically being resourced as prompt engineers as they try to figure out a way to replicate the jobs of investment banks. So this is unlikely to be something that the big banks are going to miss, and is an interesting, apparently secretive project that they've been working on for some time. The third one, we've talked about this before. They launched a tool called Sora 2 a couple weeks ago. So this is an AI video creation tool, just basically. But in addition, it's also a social network. So it looks like they're coming for Meta and TikTok in that they're trying to create an environment in which you not only create these videos, but you're also sharing them and interacting with other people, just as you would on any other social media platform. And the last piece of news, OpenAI is planning to release adult content starting this December. And this news came 24 hours after the governor of California vetoed a bill that would have imposed safety standards on AI companion chatbots for minors. So there's a lot of complexity there, a lot of detail. We have some great resources we'll link to if you want to dig into this. We've talked about this before, but OpenAI is making about $13 billion in revenue at the same time that they're raising hundreds of billions of dollars, and at a time when they're talking about their need being as great as $10 trillion. So they have a core business model problem that they are desperate to solve. But it also seems like they are taking on a ton of different serious, fierce competitors with huge pocketbooks and a lot of resources. So remains to be seen where they land in this very complicated web of too big to fail AI. Private equity is coming for everyone right after OpenAI. Private equity is buying into energy, sports, and the military. So here are three really interesting stories for you. First up, private equity powered up. BlackRock had a $6.2 billion acquisition of Minnesota Power, in spite of the fact that consumer groups were opposed to it, as was a state judge. This was approved by the Regulatory Commission in Minnesota in early October. The second piece of related news, Blackstone is trying to pursue an $11.5 billion deal of TXNM Energy, and that is pending approval. It's expected in 2026. These are both massive deals, and we have talked a lot about the endless need that AI has for energy and the fact that our energy consumption and our energy grid are basically maxed out at capacity right now. PE is investing as electricity demand is sure to rise in the coming decades, and it's raising concerns about where our rates will end up, both for consumers and for industrials. And there's also some questions about service reliability and what the future is going to hold. Private equity is not stopping at energy. They're also buying into sports. This is a really interesting one. The private equity arm of the University of California, they're called UC Investments. They've proposed a $2.4 billion deal for a 10% stake in the Big Ten. So might be a little bit confusing, but who can keep up with sports conferences these days anyway? This is a really interesting question. It would be the first time, if this deal was approved, that private equity money is financing collegiate athletics, but I suspect it may not be the last. So, this $2.4 billion deal would result in money being given to 18 schools in the Big Ten, and it would be approximately $100 million each, but the distribution is not even across schools. Now, this deal would extend media rights to 2046, and it is said that both Michigan and USC, so that's the University of Southern California, have raised concerns to this. They're concerned that they're going to be giving up long-term revenue over short-term stability for the conference. And so this remains a live issue. But I suspect that if the conference says yes to this deal, this will not be the last time that we see private equity in collegiate athletics. And our last story has to do with private equity potentially buying into the US Army. The Financial Times has a fascinating story about the Secretary of the Army, who is a former investment banker. He has been seeking partnership with private equity groups to try to fill some of the modernization needs of the Army. So, over the next 10 years, there's a $150 billion modernization need that the Army has. And he said to the Financial Times that his budget is $15 million. And so he is effectively recruiting private equity firms to help him figure out how to bridge this gap. And it looks like a transformation of the acquisition process and possibly a real change of fortune for defense contractors and systems integrators who have historically had a lock on the biggest programs that the military supports. The biggest names in private equity are involved, including Apollo, Cerberus, KKR, and the Carlyle Group. And the ask seems to be to come up with strategic initiatives, including innovative financing that can help the Army meet its need. Some of the things that have been on the table include potentially the swap of public lands. So those are taxpayer-owned lands, often in the Western United States, but they're all over the country for things like data centers. And as we mentioned in the prior story, there's a lot of need for energy to fuel those data centers. In addition, there are some questions about whether or not these deals could help the US military build more capacity around critical minerals. And we have talked a number of times about rare earths. We've also noted that the Pentagon has become the largest investor in the only US rare earths mine. So this is clearly a huge strategic issue for the military and the Army in particular. Now, the Secretary of the Army is saying that this is something that he wants to finalize very quickly. He has said as early as the end of this year, so end of 2025, that's just a few months away. And I think this is a very intriguing question because to me, there are some very strong pros and cons. Now, this is a really complicated issue. On the one hand, it could be a way to really disrupt what has been a pretty stodgy and inefficient defense contracting system that has effectively taken hold since World War II. The US military is legendary for significant cost overruns and decade-plus long delays, especially when it comes to important projects like the Joint Strike Fighter. And there's a whole host, there's a very, very long list of overruns one can discuss when it comes to defense contractors. And so there is something intriguing about changing a system and really bringing in some level of competition and innovation. Now, on the flip side of this, we are talking about the most powerful military in the history of the world. And so this is a non-trivial issue, to say the least, not just for the defense contractors. Those are huge businesses with hundreds of thousands of employees across the country. So any massive change in that sector is likely to have economic ramifications, I think. Plus, this is something that undoubtedly is going to have a lot of political fallout, both in Congress, to the extent that they're planning to do any work this year, but also in state and localities, because these defense contractors and the companies that are subcontractors to them exist in every single one of the states. And so this is an industry with huge economic ramifications across the board. Speaking of security and geopolitics, there are emerging concerns over US and European intelligence sharing and partnerships. And as you've undoubtedly seen this year, there have been huge changes in US strategic relationships and in geopolitics. And according to reporting from the Politico and some other news sources in Europe, there appear to be growing strains in intelligence sharing and in espionage as Members of the European Union worry about allegations relating to the United States and Russia. Historically, the major powers, so countries like the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, have not shared a lot of information and data widely across the European Union. There have been concerns about mixed loyalties, particularly in Eastern Europe. But in this past year, some of those concerns have been set aside, and there is very clearly a growing consensus there needs to be more intra-European data sharing. And at the same time, according to reporting from a paper in the Netherlands, there may be less information sharing with the United States. So this is another huge unknown in that the United States has historically been the leader in the world when it comes to intelligence sharing among allies. And the fact that allies may not be sharing as much information back with the United States is likely to have some ramifications that we just can't see the results of yet. We talk about this often, but the current climate really does see a mix of economic business issues and geopolitical security issues, everything from traditional wars being fought around the world to growing cybersecurity risks that are economy-shattering levels. This news also hits at a time when the U.S. has announced new sanctions against two of the biggest Russian oil companies, and at a time when the U.S. is pressuring countries like India to stop purchasing oil from Russia. So this is going to be a complicated one, I think, for both the European Union and the United States to navigate. And our last story, we like to close with good news when we can. And this is good news for consumers, although maybe not so for pharmaceutical companies. California is launching its new insulin pens on January 1st, 2026. They'll be priced at $11 a dose, which is 90% the market rate. And it is sometimes hard to tell what the market rate even is in healthcare because it's so opaque. And it really depends on what kind of insurance you have and whether or not you are appropriately insured or underinsured. California partnered with a nonprofit to create these insulin pens, and this program is supposed to be a model that could be used nationally to try to bring down drug costs. They next plan to move into biosimilars. For context, in the United States, we pay roughly 2.5 to 3 times as much as other countries when it comes to drug prices. And this has been a huge challenge for U.S. consumers and for the businesses that pay for employer insurance here in the U.S. This is something that a lot of people have wanted to solve for quite a long time. And it will be very interesting to see if other states pick up this kind of program or if Congress wakes up and does something on the national level. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back here very soon. And thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, leave us a review, subscribe to the show, or check out another episode. We appreciate your support.